You're watching extended coverage of the latest attacks between Israel and Iran, a day after U.S. military strikes on Iran's three main nuclear facilities. Iranian state media are reporting another attack by Israel on one of those sites, Fordow. There have also been explosions in Iran's capital. Israel's defense minister, Israel Katz, says its forces are striking Tehran with unprecedented force. Missiles have landed in several areas, including near a hospital. Iran has in turn launched missiles towards Israel. Explosions have been heard in multiple cities, including in Tel Aviv and in Ashdod. The sirens sounded across Israel for more than 35 minutes, which is the longest time since the conflict began 10 days ago. One of the missiles landed in Lachish, south of Jerusalem. Let's take this on now with Saeed Khatibzadeh, who's the Deputy Minister of Foreign Affairs for Education and Research. He joins us now from the Iranian capital. Mr. Khatibzadeh, thank you for joining us here on Al Jazeera. We've been watching Iran launch quite a concerted attack on Israel this morning, strikes taking place in daytime. Normally, we've seen them taking place at night. Is this all part of the response to the initial U.S. strike or simply part of the ongoing tit-for-tat with Israel?
Well, thank you very much for having me. Let me first be very clear to you that this is not a tit-for-tat ongoing conflict. This is an aggression started by the Israeli genocidal regime against Iran and Iranian people. We decided to defend under Article 51 of the UN Charter, which is our right to respond. So what is happening right now is a legitimate defense against the aggressor, which is quite clear to everybody is Israeli criminals. What is happening right now is we are trying to stop Israelis of these atrocities and all these crimes that they are doing against my people. Earlier today they attacked another Red Crescent center in Tehran. They attacked up until now few hospitals in Kermanshah in Tehran. They have martyred and killed more than hundreds of innocent children and women, and plus more to hundreds of innocent civilians. They are deliberately attacking our civilians, and they are just misusing all these words of nuclear program and others to just justify their unjust, unprovoked, unnecessary aggression against Iran. They are doing this because they would like to impose hegemony on all countries in this region and to pose threat to everybody. Everybody can understand in this region that what's going on is Israelis trying to misuse the opportunity in the region to institutionalize its hegemony over other countries, and we have no option just to respond, to defend our country.
Okay. Strikes so far from Iran are targeting only Israel. Is Iran still considering responding to the U.S. strikes against its nuclear facilities? Are you prepared, for example, to target U.S. bases?
You understand better than me what happened was a grave mistake by Americans. They not only violated international law, but they also betrayed and violated non-proliferation treaty. Americans, as a nuclear power, waged a war against Iran and attacked our nuclear facilities, which were under the safeguard, which were under the monitoring and supervision of International Atomic Energy Agency, IAEA. And everything was under the supervision of this watchdog agency. So Americans violated, violated the international law. And if I want to be more frank and more clear on this, they actually put the whole NPT in a huge risk, because now everybody is talking about if NPT cannot ensure the rights of peaceful nuclear activities for countries, then what is the purpose of NPT and what is the purpose of countries to remain in NPT? But regarding what you asked, definitely Iran has this inherent right of responding to this violation and to this aggression which happened on Iran soil. I'm sure that this is something that Iran will decide on how, when, and at which level to respond to Americans and this aggression that they did against against Iran.
So it's still an option to target US bases in the region. So too, of course, closing the Strait of Hormuz, I imagine. But you will have calculated what the US's response might be if you did target US bases or indeed close the Strait of Hormuz. What is the calculation by the Iranian administration of how the US would respond if you did proceed in that way?
I think the calculation should have been done in Washington when they decided to invade Iran, to bomb our nuclear facilities. I'm sure that even Americans know that this violation cannot be remain unresponded, and definitely all the sovereign countries and all the sovereign states understand that no attack, such attacks actually, unprovoked, unnecessary, without any UN mandate, is violation of international law. Iran's response will be calculated, but definitely would be within the framework of our rights.
We understand that today Israel has been targeting various sites, including hitting once again the Fordow site, but also Evin prison in Tehran, which holds many high-profile prisoners and, as I say, being targeted by Israel. Are you concerned that perhaps the aim here is to spark a mass release of prisoners in an attempt to sow discord with Iran? We've seen it in other countries, of course.
We are talking about a very genocidal, criminal apartheid regime of Israel. So anything, is possible. But first of all, the people of Iran is so united. You have an office here, and people here, they can understand to what extent I am telling, exactly what is happening right now on the streets in Tehran. The whole nation is on rise, and they are very much united and unified, in their posture against the aggressor, which is Israelis. They may have some even more dirty tactics, but we are very much determined to push back. We are very much determined to impose our will and our determination on the criminal Israeli regime. And people in Palestine and people in Israel should know that they are taking hostage by this by this regime. Whatever we are doing, hitting, deliberately just military and intelligence headquarters and those headquarters in Tel Aviv and other cities that are actually planning and perpetrating all these attacks against Iran, is a mean to stop this genocidal regime of continuing this outrageous act, and reckless and rogue activities that they are doing. You just mentioned that this morning they again started a new campaign, which definitely will be responded harshly by Tehran, and we are going to continue. We are ready for continuing this. Those who are remembering Iran in these 8 years imposed war, which Saddam Hussein imposed on Iran, they know and they understand when Iran is entering into defense, we call it a holy defense and holy resistance, and we are ready to go up to the end.
Okay.
Then to the extension that aggressor stops this invasion aggression.
The foreign minister of Iran, is in Moscow on a diplomatic mission. What will be his aim? What will he be asking of Russia, of President Vladimir Putin?
You know that we were in the middle of diplomacy when Israelis started this aggression. We were in Oslo, actually, a day before Israelis' attack on Iran, and then and there we exchanged, a few messages with people who were supposed to be our negotiating partner in the United States. Of course, some Europeans and some foreign ministers from the region also, they were there. And we had, very good, briefing meetings with them to brief them about what's happening. Just exactly the day that we discussed all these issues with both Americans, regional authorities, and European authorities. Israelis plan to attack Iran, and they very much try to sabotage the whole process. But Iran is always committed to diplomacy.
Okay, but what I'm saying is, so what diplomacy will come out of this meeting? Sorry to interrupt, sir. I just want to ask, what diplomacy will come out of this meeting with Vladimir Putin? Because in the sense,
whenever you would like.
Of course, what diplomacy will come out of this meeting with President Vladimir Putin? Because, so far, they have said and criticized the United States in what they did, but they are not prepared to enter the fray, as it were.
I think that we are very much prepared to defend ourselves, and we are very much to push back and respond to these criminal Israelis. So the diplomacy, what we are doing is, first of all, to clear our position, our defensive position here. And second, it is not confined to President Putin or Russia. What I was mentioning was that we started this diplomacy with E3 plus EU representative, plus then we moved to Istanbul to talk to foreign minister of Islamic countries and to have some bilateral meetings there. Then we started to go to Moscow because, as you know, we have very deep multi-layered relation with Russia on different issues, and they have been quite clear on their position on this invasion that Americans and Israelis are coordinating with each other. So what is going to happen in Moscow definitely is a high level of coordination. But the bottom line is that Iran is well prepared itself based on its own capacity to push back Israelis and to respond decisively to Israelis.
All right, we'll leave it there. Deputy Foreign Minister of Foreign Affairs for Education Research in Iran, Saeed Khatibzadeh, thank you for your time. Well, let's go now to Noor O'Day, who's in Oman and has the latest on the exchange of attacks between Israel and Iran. So, Noor, as we've been discussing, Iran has launched more missiles towards Israel in the early hours of Monday. What do we know about what their impact has been?
Well, it was a smaller volley. I have to say we haven't seen an official Israeli statement from the army, but the reports in Israeli media estimate 10 to 15 missiles were launched from Iran. The difference being is that sirens went off for about 40 minutes nonstop, and this was the longest we've seen or heard sirens go off in this confrontation. The targets, Nick, of the missiles spanned a very large part of Israel, from the north in the occupied Syrian Golan Heights, the Upper Galilee, Safad, and all the way down to the central coastal areas, all the way down to Ashkelon and Ashdod. 5 impacts were reported, including one that damaged the power plant in Ashdod. Another impact was reported south of Jerusalem, another in the Tel Aviv area. We're not sure what the impact areas are, except for the one in Ashdod, because, again, we have to remind our viewers, the Israeli military censor has severely restricted the public's ability to ascertain where those missiles have been hitting, what they have been hitting. But there were no injuries reported in that incident, and the damage remains to be seen, because we only know of the damage to the power plant in Ashdod. 8,000 Israelis impacted by power outages in that area, but the repairs are ongoing, as we understand.
The Israeli military has put out a statement on the U.S. strikes on Iran. What is their position, and could the Iran campaign perhaps soon come to an end?
Well, it doesn't seem, there are no indications that the military campaign that Israel started on June 13 would come to an end. In fact, all we saw regarding the U.S. strike is the Israeli side, the army, the prime minister describing it as spectacular, as historic, thanking Donald Trump for that strike. But we also heard from the Israeli prime minister saying that Israel would continue its campaign, that there were still a lot more targets to hit, and that Israel would only stop when it achieves all those goals. What are all those goals? Well, that is also not clear, but we have to take into account the fact that Israeli officials, senior ministers, and the prime minister have been talking about toppling the government in Tehran, about assassinating the supreme leader of Tehran, and that coinciding with some of the comments we heard from Donald Trump, one begins to draw a picture of perhaps a prolonged confrontation with Iran, something many Israeli commentators have warned against, because a war of attrition, given the impact of these Iranian missiles, the impact on the economy, on the psychology of the Israeli public, would have far-reaching consequences for Israel, something that is unprecedented. The Israelis are simply not used to this kind of confrontation.
All right, Nora, thanks for that. Nora Day reporting there from Amman in Jordan. Let's head across to Tehran, to the Iranian capital, where Ali Hashim is standing by for us there. So, Ali, from Iran's point of view, tell us what's happening there, what sites have been targeted.
Well, just a few minutes ago, there was another huge explosion. We are trying to know where this explosion, where the airstrike has hit. But there have been several airstrikes in Tehran, in the city itself, not just on the peripheries, in the city itself. The Shahid Beheshti University was targeted to the north of Tehran, also an area close to central Tehran in Vanak also was hit, the Iranian Red Crescent. To the south of the city, on the peripheries, Shahrireh, to the west of the city, Karaj. And now we're hearing, of course, of not now, but a few minutes ago, about the Israeli attack on Fordow. The Israelis are saying it's the road to Fordow and not Fordow itself. It's not the facility itself. Also a drone attack on an entrance to prison, Evin prison, and a drone attack on a hospital just behind our office. So these are the attacks that we can say they happened, and we can also deny that there was an attack on the Iranian national broadcaster IRIB, as was reported before. So it's a kind of a wave that started midday today, and it seems that it's continuing, part of the escalation that's already taking place and being paralleled with Iranian retaliation by launching missiles, including some new missiles that are hitting inside Israel. As we can see, that the number of missiles that are being launched from Iran are less. However, the efficacy is higher, and these are portraying kind of a different tactics the Iranian military is adopting in its retaliation.
Ali, this attack on Evin prison, it's curious, isn't it? Because we've seen it before in Egypt, for example, I think, when prisons were attacked and, in an attempt to enforce the release of prisoners there in a bid to sow discord within the country.
Well, I think this stresses the politicization of this battle, of this war. The Israelis on one side are saying that the main goal is hitting Iran's nuclear program, but it's clear that this campaign goes beyond that. It goes towards trying to hit the system itself, to hit the establishment, and to create a kind of havoc in the city. And of course, hitting a prison gives a kind of also other kind of signs and sends messages to the system, especially after President Trump spoke today and mentioned the idea of regime change indirectly.
All right, Ali, leave it there for the moment. Thanks for that update there. Ali Hashim there in Tehran. Well, as we've been saying, Russian President Vladimir Putin is meeting the Iranian Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi in Moscow. Putin has called the US strikes on Iran's nuclear sites groundless and says Russia's position has been conveyed through diplomatic channels. He says Moscow is trying to help the Iranian people and hopes that talks will find a way out of the crisis. Let's speak now to Yulia Shapovalova, our correspondent, who joins us from Red Square in Moscow. So, Yulia, what's known about the Iranian foreign minister's message to Vladimir Putin and indeed the president's response?
Well, we're waiting for official statements from this meeting. We've heard reports from Mr. Araghchi. He's here to deliver a letter from Iran's supreme leader asking for his support. That's what kind of support remains to be seen. That can be a request for military equipment. Probably he would ask Putin to be a mediator in negotiations with Trump. There's a possibility that Iran can make some concessions to Trump to discuss how far Iran can really go in this escalation path and what kind of consequences Iran can meet. And basically, what else can Putin and Russia do for Iran?
So tell us, Yulia, what more can Russia do in order to provide assistance to Iran, its strategic partner?
We've just heard from Kremlin spokesman Dmitry Peskov. According to him, Russia's assistance to Iran will depend on what Tehran needs. Russia has already offered its mediation efforts and, basically can assist Iran with its enriched uranium. We also heard from Russian Nuclear Energy Corporation, from its CEO, Likhachov. According to him, Rosatom is able to technically solve all the problems with enriched uranium in Iran, including high-grade uranium, if international agreements are reached, if they are in place. So Russia can go ahead as it has all the necessary expertise.
Yulia, just hang on there for a second. So we've been hearing from President Putin, so let's have a listen to what he had to say about the US strikes on Iran.
This is an absolutely unprovoked act of aggression against Iran with no basis and no justification whatsoever. We are making efforts to support the Iranian people. As you know, I have held phone conversations with the President of the United States, the Prime Minister of Israel, the President of the United Arab Emirates, and the President of your country. And I'm very glad you're in Moscow today. This gives us an opportunity to discuss all these urgent matters and think together about how we might find a way out of the current situation.
So Yulia Shapovalova back in Red Square in Moscow. So Yulia, Putin throwing his support by Iran, but will it be just that, just verbal support, or are we likely to see anything more?
Basically, I can't particularly... Well, I can't hear you really well right now because it's quite noisy here. And what else I can say is that Russia has unanimously condemned the U.S. aggression, U.S. attacks against Iran and its uranium facilities. And Russia is ready to assist Iran, but in which way actually remains to be seen. What we know at this point that Russia is ready to be a mediator in this conflict, in this crisis between Iran and Israel, between Iran and the U.S. And, it remains to be seen how this meeting is going to go and what it's going to bring.
All right, Yulia, we'll leave it there. Thanks very much, Yulia Shapovalova there in Moscow. The head of the UN's nuclear watchdog is leading an emergency meeting after Sunday's US strikes on Iranian nuclear sites. Members of the International Atomic Energy Agency are there in Vienna to assess the escalation and the risks. Both Iran and the IAEA have said there are no immediate signs of radioactive contamination around the three sites that were targeted by the US. This comes as Iran's parliament considers suspending its cooperation with the IAEA.
First of all, we must return to the negotiating table. And for that, allow IAEA inspectors, the guardians on our behalf of the NPT, to go back to Iran's nuclear sites and account for the stockpiles of uranium, including, most importantly, the 400 kilograms enriched to 60%.
Let's go live to Vienna now. Jonah Hull is standing by for us there. So, Jonah, what else did we hear from the Iranian ambassador?
Well, first of all, that was Rafael Grossi, of course, the Director General of the IAEA, opening this unscheduled session of all the Board of Governors, 35 countries of the IAEA, behind those closed doors behind me, in the wake of the American attacks on Iran over the weekend. Essentially, an effort for all of those countries to voice their opinions. We know that there have been angry denunciations from the Chinese and Russian delegations here, but also an attempt to hear what the IAEA, I beg your pardon, has to say in terms of joining the dots, really, between what the US administration has said, Donald Trump saying the attacks on the weekend completely and totally obliterated Iran's nuclear program, and the perhaps rather more murky facts on the ground. And you heard Grossi there talking about the whereabouts of these 400 kilos of highly enriched uranium and their safety at the moment, a point of huge concern. But yeah, in the last hour, the Iranian ambassador, Reza Najafi, stepped out of that meeting and addressed the media in pretty combative voice. Mr. Najafi was talking about a clear violation of international law in these attacks, going further to say that the illegal US aggression represented an attack by one IAEA member and nuclear non-proliferation treaty signatory against another IAEA member and NPT signatory, and that had caused Iran, he said, to call into question the overall functioning and effectiveness of both the IAEA as the agency that it is safeguarding members' rights in terms of nuclear proliferation, not gaining a weapon, but also safeguarding their right to use nuclear technology for peaceful purposes, which of course is what Iran has said that it always has done. And you alluded there to possible moves in Iran to step away from the NPT. Parliament said to be preparing a bill to that effect. No word of that here. Mr. Najafi concluding his remarks by reaffirming Iran's right to self-defense and saying it would take steps to neutralize the threat at a time, in a place, and in a manner of its choosing.
The subsequent illegitimate use of force by the U.S., apparently a recognized depository of the NPT, targeting safeguarded nuclear facilities of Iran, occurred despite the fact that the agency's inspectors maintained an uninterrupted presence at these facilities for a long time, and all operations conducted therein were subject to the agency's monitoring and verification. This ruthless act has inflicted a profound and systematic blow to the credibility and legal coherence of the NPT and international non-proliferation regime.
So, Jonah, what would the potential consequences be if Iran did pull out of the non-proliferation treaty?
Well, I think it's important to note from what the ambassador was saying there that essentially Iran's position is, look, we are members of the NPT. We have submitted to inspections over the years, albeit the IAEA has been very vocal in the last 10 days or so in talking about breaches of those obligations more recently. But Iran saying, look, what has it got us? It's got us attacked by a fellow member of this organisation and a fellow signatory of that treaty. What is the point of being a part of it? Now, as I say, they haven't announced that step of stepping away from the NPT. It is said to be in the works. This is a treaty. It's 55 years old now. It is set up to prevent any country from gaining nuclear weapons, but also to foster cooperation and preserve the right of all countries to use nuclear technology for peaceful purposes, which, as I say, is what Iran has always claimed that it has done. What would happen if it left? Well, essentially, it would be stepping away from that obligation. Some might see that as a sign of changing tack towards an accelerated weapons program. That could have a ripple effect in the region. It could destabilize the treaty within the region. Other countries perhaps looking at their positions under the treaty. But crucially, it would lift obligations under the IAEA regime of inspections. There are inspectors on the ground in Iran even now, albeit not having access yet to those sites. Those inspections would end, those inspectors would leave, Iran's nuclear facilities would go completely dark to world scrutiny and observation. The extent of its ability to weaponize would also go dark, and the whereabouts and safety of those uranium enrichment stockpiles would be unknown.
All right, that's the picture from Vienna. Jonah Hull reporting there. Thanks, Jonah. Let's stay in Vienna. We're going to speak now to Elena Sokova, who's the Executive Director of the Vienna Center for Disarmament and Non-Proliferation, joins us live from the Austrian capital, as I say. So, Elena, just as a bit of background for those watching, the NPT came into force back in 1970. Currently, more than 190 countries are signatories, and its aim, of course, is to stop the spread of nuclear weapons. Do you fear what is happening now will drive Iran out of the treaty altogether?
First of all, thank you for having me, and a kind of good continuation of the discussion based on the previous speakers' points on that. I think that Iran will likely consider that option because it doesn't have many other options in terms of response to it. And I'm really concerned that it could do really irreparable damage to the treaty, to the NPT. As your previous speakers mentioned, other countries may consider reconsider their options as well. And overall, the regime has been holding for so many years. It has been hailed as a big success. So more countries acquiring nuclear weapons is certainly a very disturbing development. And if Iran pulls out of the NPT and goes for reconstructing its nuclear weapons program, it won't happen overnight, but it may be the option that it may choose.
How important is the NPT? Just to try and put this into context for us, to explain, just what's at stake here.
Well, first of all, if you go back to the history, one of the reasons the NPT was negotiated is to actually prevent more countries from acquiring nuclear weapons. As NPT was negotiated, there were 5 states that had that technology. They happen also to be the P5, the 5 permanent members of the UN Security Council. But at that time, the estimates was that another 20, 30 countries would acquire nuclear weapons. And many actually countries that you would be even surprised to see on the list were seriously considering developing nuclear weapons. So the regime itself is considered a big success because it stopped that scenario. And we only had, in all this time, North Korea is the only one that left the NPT and developed nuclear weapons. So many countries are watching what's going on in Iran nowadays and its next steps. And indeed, it would be a big blow to the credibility of the NPT, to the ability of its verification system that the International Atomic Energy Agency implements, and so forth. But overall, global stability is going to be affected as well.
Of course, Iran was still submitting to inspections by the IAEA before Israel's strikes happened. So would you accept their argument that they've done, they've honored all their parts of the agreement?
They have been submitting themselves to the IAEA inspections. And in fact, the level of inspections that Iran had under the JCPOA, that 2015 Iran deal, were unprecedented. And the international community got a lot of information about the materials, their locations, the enrichment, and everything else. There have been concerns about some issues, particularly lately. And when Trump administration pulled out of the JCPOA, some of its provisions for extra inspections were already functioning inadequately, and some were dropped. But nonetheless, the IAEA had a very good picture of what takes place in Iran with the inspections that it implemented. There were issues, and particularly issues about some earlier efforts by Iran, including its prior to 2003 nuclear weapons program or alleged weapons program.
Okay, Elena, we'll have to leave it there. I do appreciate that. That's Elena Sokova speaking to us there from Vienna. Thank you. So you're watching Al Jazeera, a reminder of our top stories this hour. And Iranian state media are reporting an attack on the Fordow nuclear site. This comes a day after the US military hit 3 of Iran's key nuclear facilities. There have also been explosions in the Iranian capital. Israel's defense minister says the military is striking Tehran with unprecedented force. Iran has in turn launched missiles towards Israel. Explosions have been heard in multiple cities, including Tel Aviv and Ashdod. One of the missiles landed in Lachish, south of Jerusalem. And Russian President Vladimir Putin has been meeting Iranian Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi in Moscow. Putin called the US strikes on Iran's nuclear sites groundless and says Russia's position has been conveyed through diplomatic channels. Speak now to Yossi Beilin, who's a former Israeli Minister of Justice, joins us now from Tel Aviv. Yossi, thanks for joining us here again on Al Jazeera. First of all, just give us an update on the ongoing attacks we've been seeing this morning in Israel coming to you from Iran and the impact that they've been having.
Yeah, it was a long morning, and I had to stop my previous interview and go to the shelter. But in the last hours, it is actually kind of a ceasefire, on at least speaking about Iranian missiles on Israel. There were no damage. There were damages in assets, different assets, but not casualties. And it's different from other days because of the length, but not because of the strength.
Indeed. Is Iran still inflicting damage on Israel and also, I suppose, having a psychological impact on residents right across the country, because it must be pretty challenging dealing with incoming missiles like that to that degree. What is your sense of what's happening here and the potential implications of Israel's initial actions and then the United States going in the way that they have, and what potentially Iran might now do?
Well, the best thing for Iran to do is to get back to the negotiating table. I mean, had they agreed to the different ideas which were raised by President Trump, and they were given 60 days for that, there would have been no attack on them on the 61st day. And I think that they made a mistake by rejecting everything. And I think that if they come back to the table and negotiate, there is a possibility to find solutions as they were found in 2015 in the 5+1 agreement. This is the best way and perhaps the only way to finish the current war, and it will be for the benefit of all parties.
It might indeed have the opposite effect as well, Yossi, there, mightn't it? Because they may well yet attack US assets or close off the Strait of Hormuz, or worse, and also pull out of the non-proliferation treaty. And, you know, this goes completely against the whole objective of the exercise, doesn't it?
Yeah, but they are not stupid people, and they know that all these options are kind of boomerangs. So, for example, closing the straits, the Hormuz straits, they are exporting their oil there through these straits. So what are they going to do? To send them in boxes? I mean, and all the other options are also options that may harm them. So the option of finding a solution which will allow them to achieve their economic needs, but not the belligerent ones, would be better for all of us. I don't see a real different or better solution for the current conflict.
I see what you're saying in the sense of, you know, the ideal outcome from your point of view of what should happen here, but that may well be and probably isn't the thinking of the Iranian administration, especially in terms of what they do next, and then also what they do as far as trying to create potentially a nuclear potential for themselves. This might actually increase that chance.
Well, I don't know what do they really think. I mean, the situation right now, which is different than the situation a week ago, 10 days ago, is that a very, very big chunk of their efforts to build the nuclear capacity was decimated, especially by the American power and also by the Israeli ones. So they are not in the same position to dictate their conditions to the others. And that is why they will have to understand that in order to at least achieve part of their targets, they will have to compromise.
Yossi, appreciate your perspective. Thanks very much for joining us here in Al Jazeera. That's Yossi Beilin, former Israeli Minister of Justice, joining us from Tel Aviv. Thanks a lot. Well, joining us here on set is Mohanad Saloom, who's an assistant professor in critical security studies at the Doha Institute of Graduate Studies. Mohanad, great to have you with us. So what's your sense of where we're at today with what we've seen of rockets coming in, of missiles coming in from Iran and reciprocal attacks from Israel to Iran, and the likelihood of where we go from here?
Well, I think we are at a very critical stage of this conflict, probably a very advanced one. And I agree with the assessment that this conflict is not going to be very long. It's not in the interest of the US or the Israelis that this conflict would go long. So their options are closing in. Now, what Iran has and what the US has, I think they do have different strategic objectives. And there is a very small space to reconcile these. But also now, because it's Israel who started this war, or whatever they call it, the aggression or the military campaign. On the other side, we have the US also factoring in, and they are part now of the conflict officially. They need to offer Iran a way down from the tree. They would have to give them something so that they can go back and tell their people that the effort of 40 years is not wasted. Probably some kind of a deal that Iranians would accept under, obviously, a duress. Because if we keep cornering Iran and not giving them a way out, Iranians actually have quite a few options to strike back. Basically, strategically, they are basic and based in an area where there are so many American bases, and also Israel is still there, so they could attack Israel. And the Iranians have learned over the years, over the last 20 to 30 years, that waiting until too late, until too weak, if I think that's more correct, like what Saddam did, like what Gaddafi did, is not really a good option. So they might opt for striking early, and I mean striking US bases. Yes, the response would be overwhelming. The United States has a lot of power. But if the Iranians feel that this conflict is existential, they might actually strike.
From the US and Israeli point of view, what about this talk, we've had a lot of it, of potential regime change within Iran? Is that a route that they're really going to pursue? Because that would not tie in with what you're saying of this being a short conflict.
Mm-hmm. Well, that's what they hope for and they wish for. But probably the reality on the ground is much more complicated. I think what we are, I mean, if I want to compare what is happening now with the Iraqi case study, because it's the closest and the most similar, it's Iraq. We're looking at Iraq in post-1991, where the United States has already degraded Iraq military capabilities. Iraq did not, and obviously Iraq did not have nuclear sites, but we had in Iraq WMDs. But then there were some talks about regime change, but the assessment then that it's not that we're not there yet, and the regime change has to come from inside. There were some instability inside Iraq then, but it didn't happen. If we look at Iran now, it looks to me that they're not there yet. The pressure, I think it's a pressure card. So the US and Israel, they're saying that if we keep this bombardment, there might be some kind of unrest inside Iran. And by the way, the target in the prison was pretty much symbolic, and it's within that rhetoric, because the message to the Iranians, and specifically to those in the prison, that we are here to free you, and we are trying. And I think this came very, very clearly from the Prime Minister of Israel, saying that we are there to help. This war is to help the Iranians free themselves from this regime, and we're trying to help you. So the narrative we're looking at is, I think it's there. It's not there yet, the regime change, but it's on the cards, and the Iranians would not like this very much.
All right, we'll leave it there for now. Mohanad Saleem, appreciate that. Thank you. Well, the White House has repeatedly said Sunday's attack was aimed at preventing Iran from producing a nuclear weapon. Now, President Donald Trump is hinting at another motive, posting on Truth Social. He wrote, "It's not politically correct to use the term regime change, but if the current Iranian regime is unable to make Iran great again, why wouldn't there be a regime change? MIGA, make Iran great again," he said. Well, let's continue this conversation with John Hendren, who joins us now from Washington, D.C. So, John, just tell us more about what the president was saying.
I don't think those MIGA hats are going to sell very well. Trump has been at odds with the rest of his administration. From the Pentagon, Pete Hegseth, the defense secretary, has sent two messages very clearly. First, the U.S. military is powerful and the strikes on Iran have been effective. Second, this was a limited one-off attack, and the U.S. is not seeking regime change. J.D. Vance, the vice president, went on the Sunday talk shows to say essentially the same thing. He said, we're not at war with Iran, and the U.S. is not seeking regime change. So the administration has been sending one message, and then in this social media post, Donald Trump is saying something else, but he's being coy. He didn't exactly say that he wants to pursue regime change. He said, if the current Iranian regime can't make Iran great again, why wouldn't there be regime change? So this might have been an impetuous tweet. It might have also been an effort to try to foment some kind of uprising in Iran. But history and social psychology teaches us that when a country is attacked, there tends to be a rally around the flag effect. And that seems to be what's happened in Iran. After a meeting with his national security team, Donald Trump will no doubt be asked about that, among other things, and we may learn more in the coming hours.
All right, John, back with you as we do. John Hendren there in Washington, D.C. Thank you. The United States military's strikes on Iran have been discussed at an emergency session of the UN Security Council. The meeting was called on Iran's request. China, Russia and Pakistan are pushing for a draft resolution calling for an immediate ceasefire. Gabriel Elizondo reports now from UN headquarters in New York.
While President Donald Trump says damage to the Fordow nuclear site is monumental, Rafael Grossi, the head of the International Atomic Energy Agency, told an emergency session of the UN Security Council the real damage to the heavily fortified site remains unknown.
At this time, no one, including the IAEA, is in a position to assess the underground damage at Fordow.
Iran's ambassador to the UN used the council meeting to warn the United States.
As an independent, peace-seeking nation, the Islamic Republic of Iran had repeatedly warned the warmongering U.S. regime to refrain from stumbling into this quagmire. Even though Iran reserves its full and legitimate right under international law to defend itself against this blatant U.S. aggression and its Israeli proxy.
U.S. military strikes.
The U.S. envoy repeated comments by President Trump.
Any Iranian attack, direct or indirect, against Americans or American bases will be met with devastating retaliation.
In a sign of how rapidly the situation on the ground is evolving, UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres made a call for peace just 48 hours ago.
I have a simple and clear message. Give peace a chance.
And now this.
That call was not heeded. Instead, the bombing of Iranian nuclear facilities by the United States marks a perilous turn in a region that is already reeling.
Russia, China, and Pakistan have proposed a draft resolution condemning attacks on Iranian nuclear sites and demanding an immediate and unconditional ceasefire. The language of this draft is currently being negotiated by council members and could go up for a vote in the coming days. Gabriel Zondo, Al Jazeera at the United Nations in New York.